Welcome to the Siwike podcast, the only podcast that shares the stuff you didn't know you needed to know about jobs, careers, and life. The Siwike podcast, the stuff I wish I knew earlier.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Siwike Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier podcast. And we're here with one of our guest hosts, Brian Lau, and we thought we'd have a conversation on the future of work. So, Brian, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Luki. How are you?
Sounds good. So you do a lot of work on the future of work in kind of what you do day to day. So I thought you'd be a great person to have a conversation. And we want to kind of start a little bit with having a discussion on like, what did you think about work growing up? So when you were a kid growing up, like when did it kind of kind of sink in that you actually had to do this thing called work?
Pretty early on, I guess. My parents always had kind of mentioned the whole idea of needing to go to school, study hard, so that you can get a job. And there's this mysterious thing growing up saying this job you needed to work. I didn't really know what it was. I knew my dad disappeared, for 8 hours of the day and came back. But for the longest time, the idea that I had always thought was, you go to school, you study, you get a job, you work, for couple of decades and then you retire, and that was my view for the longest time.
It sounds good. And then how did that that view turn into a reality? So what was kind of like the first foray into that job world, and how did that kind of meet or not meet expectations?
Yeah, I mean, I got my first taste of, I guess, employment, more or less kind of a part-time job as a swimming instructor and a lifeguard in high school. And
Okay.
so that was kind of like, okay, this is different from the work that I thought, everyone else drives off to go and do their thing. But earning a paycheck and knowing that there's a lot of things that you can do to earn money, and a lot of effort required to do that, especially in your first job, started making me think about that there's like a lot of things out there. And then that kind of drives where your interest and like what might you want to do to get paid. And so that's when I started thinking about like, oh, okay, there seems to be a vast world of what work really is, and that's why we keep getting told to go to school.
For sure. And obviously, most parents don't necessarily want their kids to go to school to become a swim instructor. But there are definitely jobs and work experience that we have all along the way. So maybe some stories or some thoughts in terms of like how a job as like a swim instructor kind of helped you in future roles in the workforce.
Yeah, I didn't know it at the time. But some of the training that you take as an instructor in terms of leading a class, working under pressure, leadership experience that you get in terms of planning a lesson, not dissimilar to kind of full-blown teaching in school, those were a lot of transferable skills that you were developing at the time, which I found didn't realize until later on when I was in school, in university, where I was like, oh, these are, I would keep referring back to, well, this is how I used to do it, when I was teaching, or if I was under a high pressure situation at the pool. So it helped kind of already give you some direction or experience that you can kind of build off of when making decisions.
Sounds good. And a couple of kind of basic things is even managing your time to show up when you're
Yeah,
supposed to, because it's a little bit different when you're at school, because like if you're late, you're late. It doesn't really matter, right? And some of the profs don't even know you're in class.
that's
But
right.
I mean, if you're not there and you have 4 students, 10 students, whatever, they notice, right?
That's a big
So being
difference.
able
Yeah.
to get there on time, get there early, is definitely something that's helpful. So that's kind of like your first kind of job experience. What about kind of like the traditional professional job? So that
Mhm.
one that you wanted, maybe it's after graduation or like co-op internships, that sort of thing. What was kind of that first job experience?
Yeah, so I was fortunate to go through the co-op program, which you and I went to UTSC, to be able to have that option to do internships while in school. And so those are that's my first kind of foray into the corporate world, if you want to call it, your
Right.
suit and tie job at the time. And I think as everyone else normally is, and I was for my first swim job, I was very nervous kind of going into my first job because I really didn't know what to expect. You study certain things, you hear about certain things, but it's not until you actually arrive, you meet your new boss, you meet your new team, and then realize, okay, I'm going to have to actually do things here that I may not have done before. And so that was kind of like an eye-opening experience in terms of trying to figure out like what am I actually supposed to do here. But the key to really succeeding, I found, was being able to kind of ask the right questions at the beginning, ask lots of questions, not making assumptions, and just trying to like the more you kind of ask everyone around you because they've been there longer than you start to build this context around here's the environment you're working in, these are the people you work with, and that was I found super helpful in terms of starting to get more comfortable around my day to day and the team that I work around and the work that I've been doing for them.
For sure. Yeah, my co-op experience actually started in high school, and I was lucky enough that we actually
Amazing.
had a high school co-op, and
Yeah.
I got a job as like a network administrator. And what kind of annoyed me is that there were other interns or co-ops there, but because they were university level, right, they were actually doing the exact same work, and they were getting paid more than I was because I was part in the high school tier, and they were in the university tier. But
There's a
I
disparity
did
here.
well, I mean, it's different program funding sources and
Yeah.
stuff like that. So I kind of get it, but yeah, it didn't mean that it was less annoying. But I did find like because I was a little bit younger, I was getting that experience, and I think that experience is super important
Yeah.
in order to be able to have, and then hopefully use that to build on to get your next and next and next experience. But I mean, a lot of the things that I was doing is kind of like network administrator. I was unpacking computers and plugging them in, and things like that, right? So it was a little bit more kind of labor intensive than the traditional kind of tech job. And in my first co-op in university, we were on again the networking side, but we would have to basically archive backup tapes. And in what that
Yeah.
actually meant is I would actually have to go to the physical server, grab like they used to use these actual tapes in there, and I
Oh
actually had to
yeah.
take them
Yeah.
and put them off site because if something happened, you didn't want like the server to burn and all the backups to burn in the same time. You want it to be elsewhere, right? So I clocked a good, I don't know, like 10,000 steps easy every single
Who would have
trying
thought
to go to the
you're getting exercise on the job.
yeah, so that was kind of my first foray or first few forays into it. So it was a little bit different than the expectation, where it was more kind of the physical labor than the technical. But then it started obviously moving in a different route. But so what were your thoughts in terms of like kind of advancing in your career path? So you started co-op, and then you got more responsibilities as you got a full-time job, and then you're supposed to climb the corporate ladder and go
Yeah.
up and things like that. What were your thoughts and experience around that?
Yeah. So and similar to kind of getting that first job, being told that you need to climb the corporate ladder is this thing you hear, but like in terms of how to do it, no idea. and and that was the whole thing around like my assumption when I got to the job, I was like, I guess I just keep doing my job and doing it okay, and I'll eventually just keep rising. And so like learning like what performance management is and like kind of having a career plan and talking through that is something that was kind of new to me after kind of starting through my roles. And
Hmm.
that was the kind of first exposure into like how to start advancing. I started realizing there's so many different career paths. So like yourself and me working at a large firm that we worked at, um, there's a lot of people doing different things.
Hmm.
And it was kind of the more projects I worked on, the more people I work with, the more interested I got in terms of saying, oh, tell me about, I would ask those questions and I would say, tell me about your career path. And I would hear about these really unique career paths that some people took to do really neat jobs.
Hmm.
And the more I would ask, I would say, well, how did you get there? What did you do? And then I would sometimes compare like education backgrounds. I was like, can I do that? Like, do I have the right educational background? And I would find that
Right.
some people even had completely unrelated degrees to what they were doing, and it was more of their journey. And so that was that was very useful for me to even start thinking about what the art of the possible was in terms of how to advance. Because prior to that, I would have just assumed I just keep doing my same job until my boss says you've been promoted.
Right. And what I took from that is, I mean, growing up, we have kind of the traditional quote unquote paths where like doctor, lawyer, accountant, engineer, kind of the
Hmm.
mainstream stuff that everybody kind of aspires to be. But there's so many other different areas where it could be things like management consulting, project management, like AP, supply chain, accounts payable,
Hmm.
receivable, and there's so many different things that you never heard of, and to even have that curiosity to explore and say, hey, what do you do? They're on the same floor, they're in the same
Yeah.
department, they whatever, and having those conversations. Oh, that sounds interesting. That sounds like something that I could do. So it's not just a matter of doing your job, doing it well, doing it maybe a little better than last year, but it's also exploring like what is that, as you said, the art of the possible for me to get into. Because I know for me, I was in technology in computer science, and I was supposed to
Hmm.
become a coder, right? So and I
Yeah.
did. I started and I got my first job as a coder, but the quote unquote coding company I joined was an accounting company. I was like, okay, I'm going to be coding for an accounting company. I didn't really know about this whole
Right.
consulting thing,
Right.
and then it's like, oh, this is different. This is something that I might actually want to get into, and then the curiosity. I kind of lucked out on that side, and I was able to do a lot more things. So I would encourage folks that are out there to explore their own areas, because you probably have a lot more opportunities than you think, even in your company or tangential areas and all those things like that.
Hmm. No, totally. You're talking about kind of like, what was I kind of expecting kind of going in, and what's the actual experience, especially earlier on when I was starting out. You mentioned, starting off in consulting, and I learned about it kind of through school, and then as I got into the firm, I got to work with people who were in the field, and I was asking questions, again, following their career path. And then, oh, that was very interesting. And I thought I'd love to be kind of doing that as well. And so I thought you kind of get in there, you start advising executives left, right, and center, and being able to kind of tell them all these things to do, when the reality is you're kind of aligning PowerPoint boxes left, right, and center, a lot of the time. And it was kind of really interesting to kind of go, and there's a lot of kind of background work that goes into the big presentations that happen that we advise our clients, and learning that there's a lot of different members on the team that do different things, whether it's the data analysis or whether it's kind of putting together the storyboard, and this learning what a project is, right? And so all these kinds of things over time was kind of learning, oh, projects can be different, the things we do can be different, the people you work with can be different, the expectations can be different.
Yeah, and what I took from that is kind of that quote: "Every expert was once an amateur," in the sense that
Yeah.
oftentimes you see people kind of at the pinnacle of their career. They're rarely established. They're really good at what they do, but when you actually start in that role, you have to kind of start in the ground floor, like you said, aligning PowerPoint boxes or data entry or something like that. Because
That's
in
right.
order for you to learn all that good stuff or be able to advise or provide recommendations or whatever, you actually have to have gone through it a couple of times.
Hmm.
So just be aware
Hmm.
that oftentimes that vision of what you want to do can be a little bit different than what it is, but it's often the learning that you need to go through in order to get to where you want to be. So I
Yeah.
think that's just something to be of note. And then I'd love for you to touch a little bit on kind of taking a break, right? So in your career, you decided, well, maybe it's not considered a break, but you decided to go back to school, right?
Depends who you
And
ask. Yeah.
yeah, some people, I know there's a growing trend on people taking like sabbaticals and leaves of absences, right? Go off and find themselves, right? Some people are doing it right after school, where they're taking like gap years, right,
Hmm.
before they get into the workforce. And it seems to be becoming more and more common where they have to figure out, like, is this really what I want to do? And maybe to recharge or reset or whatever. Sometimes it's going back to school. Sometimes it's just to kind of elevate yourself, or maybe it's to switch into something different. But can you talk a little bit about kind of your experience and your decisioning in terms of going down that route?
Yeah. Growing up, definitely had not heard much about taking a break. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier on, it was more of a go to school, get a job, work, then retire, right? And so there's
Right.
no mention of taking a break at any point in time, maybe aside from your couple of weeks of vacation you get a year. So the gap year, for one, is I didn't even know what one was until I was towards the later part of my university, and I actually had met some people when I was backpacking Europe who were taking a gap year. I was just, between going back to school, I was just kind of killing time over the summer, but I had met people who were taking a year off, and it was interesting. they were telling me that it was normal, quite normal in Europe to be doing that. And when I asked why, because I was like, you're just delaying your career by a year. A lot of them were saying like it's to explore, try to be independent, learn some life skills, travel, get
Mm.
some perspective. And I thought to myself, well, that makes a lot of sense. And so I kept that in mind as I was kind of advancing my career, because that was an interesting way to look at things, instead of if you're only doing the same thing over and over again, or in the same company or whatnot, doing the same role, you may not always be able to kind of think outside the box,
Mhm.
with other perspectives, that if you're able to kind of do it from different opportunities that you have, which may be similar. So that's something I kept in mind, that eventually, as I was working through the firm, and kind of working through my professional career, I had the opportunity. I was fortunate to be selected to be able to go back to school if I wanted to, because it's a common path that a lot of consultants take. After working several years, they can apply for sponsorship, and they'll be able to kind of leave for kind of graduate school and do their MBA and come back. And actually, I for the longest time delayed it, because I actually thought maybe I don't need it. Maybe I
Mm.
can continue like the career path. Through my career coaches and people I was talking to, I was learning that you could still get to where you wanted to go
Right.
without going in. So it became more of a choice to do it, as opposed to something that, hey, you should do this in order to continue on in your career. And so I actually deferred going back to school for probably several years, because I was maybe on a really cool project and I didn't want to end yet. I wanted to
Right.
keep doing, see where it went. And so I did that. But eventually I kind of took a step back at one point and decided, it's always something that I've been interested in, returning to school, and started thinking about like what else would I want to learn if I did go back to school. And part of getting these new perspectives, part of getting this credential, to be able to kind of accelerate my career, was the reason. So it was a voluntary choice that I took eventually, and I'm fortunate to have it. But that was one of my reasons to go and take that break.
And was there like a specific decision point there, or was it more just pile on, yet another reason, yet another reason, yet, and then eventually it's like, okay, fine, let me go do it.
It was kind of like that, because
Okay.
the don't go to go back to school, you don't need it, was winning for the longest time. That decision was kind of weighed heavily, and I really didn't feel that I needed it to kind of continue. I was learning really neat, interesting things on the job, and I almost felt I would be missing out. It's weirdly thinking, if I went back to school, maybe my peers who didn't would be going further on faster than me, or something like that, or getting on other projects. But I also was thinking about like trying to think about like what else could an MBA do, or graduate school, or any school for that. I was not only looking at the MBA, I was looking at other masters, more specialty programs, but I was looking at other programs as well, and thinking through that and remembering that perspective that I learned from some of the folks that I met traveling, why they were doing it. I thought this might be a good opportunity for me to broaden my horizons, and so that's why I said, you know what, this actually might be good for me from an overall perspective.
Right, and I think just to summarize the discussion for folks that are listening and are in their career path, early in their career path, work doesn't have to be just the study, work, retire type of stuff. There are a whole bunch of
Yeah.
different variations and options, and we have the benefit of being in like a first world country and have access to all these. So we come from a place of privilege, but a lot of folks that are can consider something like a gap year, and I think that is quite an interesting concept where it's almost like adulting
Yeah.
and learning to be kind of a grown up where like for those that studied locally and they commuted to work where they're still living at home and things like that, well, they're missing out on an experience versus having to live on campus and cooking for themselves and things like that. Or if you had a meal plan where you don't really have to
Hmm.
do that. Now, backpacking, you might not necessarily do that either, but at least it's different sort of skills. And then I know more and more folks are looking at kind of sabbaticals and leaves and stuff like that, whether it's for to take care of someone who like an aging parent or their own
Hmm.
health or just to
Hmm.
find themselves or to go back to school and reskill themselves. So oftentimes it is that personal choice and you're going to have to figure out and don't let necessarily the opinion of one person or a set of people influence you too much. Do what's right for you in a given circumstance. So I think it's great that we provide kind of those potential options for folks as they get out there.
Yeah. I think I think one of those things is we never really you can never really be sure around the answer. I certainly had my doubts when I was going to go back. I was like, is this the right decision? What if it doesn't, what if it's the wrong decision? What if it actually slows me down? You don't know. we always are trying to take our best educated guess. That's why we talk to people, we try to do research, get a sense of what's there. But like the way I've always seen it, education's always been kind of I viewed it as a tool, a very useful tool if you know what you're doing with it, right? It's not
Mm.
just piling on and collecting as many degrees as you can, but like knowing what you can do with education, the more is generally better, and it can unlock a lot of careers and opportunities that can kind of accelerate where you want to go. But at the same time, it's not criteria for success, which is why I always try to think of it as a tool, because like if you need it or
Mm.
you think you can use it, go for it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Thinking of it as a tool versus just a checkbox in there.
Hmm.
And sometimes you just want it as a checkbox. Like I always wanted three letters at the back of my name, so therefore you take it. And if that's the way you want to, just understand that that's the rationale versus something else. I'd love if we took some time to kind of delve into kind of trends and changes in the future work, because that's some of the stuff that you deal with. So
Hmm.
obviously COVID changed things quite significantly.
Yeah,
Remote
absolutely.
hybrid work is the new norm, and I'm hearing things like the gig economy, where like the Great Resignation, everyone has their side hustle and the startup that they're doing and things like that. And then I'm actually seeing that there's an increased interest in like the trades, where you can find like plumbers and contractors that do construction and building. They make a ton of money, and
Hmm.
a lot more people are trying to get into things like that, right? So, what are some of the trends and thoughts that you're seeing around and up and coming, or kind of already here?
Yeah, no, I think, it's safe to say that nearly everyone was affected by the pandemic and a shift in work, some for the better, some for the worse. But regardless, I think everyone can reflect to say that has forced us to think about how we're currently doing things and whether it's the
Hmm.
right way to be doing things. And if it's something that you were trying to think about before, if anything, your employer has been forced to think about it now because of the global scale of everything. And I think the good thing about that is it's kind of driven a lot of discussions. Some of them are difficult, but all
Right.
around kind of when we call about this future work, it means different things to different people. But the way we've been looking at it, when we're looking at on the product side, is it's the way we work from the workplace where we're doing our work, the space at home or the space at the office is different now. The style we work, whether it's kind of hybrid, digital, using different tools, is different now. And the workforce, the people we work with, and how things are structured, all of those are different. So, kind of those three areas, like those are kind of some key buckets of how we're looking at how all of this has been changing. And if you want to focus on it, a lot of the trends that we're seeing now is employees are now able to demand more from how they work. The customization, the personalization of like, hey, going into the office, commuting an hour and a half every day and sitting in a cubicle wasn't exactly my most productive way previously. And, it was forced upon us during the pandemic to do it another way. And for some people, not everyone, they found it more productive and better and healthier in many ways as well. And so it's driven a lot of discussions around how do we equip our employers and our valuable kind of employees with the tools and technology and the processes and to enable everyone to do work in their best way possible, while at the same time still making sure we're meeting all of our like business objectives and accomplishing the things we mean to do, but giving people more flexibility. And so that's a really big thing that we're seeing a lot. And I don't think we're quite there yet in terms of any one company or business cracking the code and having the answer, because the very classic advisory consulting answer is it depends, right? It
Hmm.
depends
Hmm.
on the company culture, what they're doing, the nature of the work they're doing. If you operate in manufacturing and have a factory floor, well, I don't really think you can have people working on laptops at home trying to
Right.
build things. So those are some of the big trends that we're exploring and looking into.
For sure. And what I took from that is COVID allowed for some of those norms and unwritten rules to be challenged and tested, to say
Hmm.
like, well,
Hmm.
do I actually have to come in for work? Like, can't I be just as
Hmm.
productive at home, virtually, or even in the same country, in the same time zone for some folks as
Yeah,
well?
yeah,
And whether the employers were willing to kind of take that to say, no, we need you in the office. But do you? Like,
yeah.
am I being
I wasn't.
rewarded? Yeah, am I being rewarded by what I do and my output and what I accomplish, or by my attendance and just
That's
taking
right.
up space in a desk. And companies and organizations are realizing, yeah, you know what, you actually don't have to sit here, but there are a lot of roles where you still need to be there, right? And it would be better where you might be more productive or build better relationships. So it's a balance, and each company will have to take kind of their own culture, their own people in mind, and then ultimately try to deliver value to their customers as a result of that. So I think
Yeah.
it's a work in progress, and things are ultimately evolving. What about the other
Especially,
components? Oh,
yeah, no, I mean, just one quick note on that, even especially across in industries as well, right? Some industries like healthcare, for example, that's changed a lot over the last couple of
mm,
years, but very different from how it would change from kind of your regular office worker, right? And so one of the
mm-hmm,
things is, telehealth is one shift. So while not
mm-hmm,
everything can be virtual, but a lot more adoption of virtual technologies now being there. And so that could free up how things are done, how often we need to go into medical facilities or hospitals. But it varies by industry as well, and it's very fascinating. But the fact is, you mentioned with all these barriers removed now from physically always needing to be there, we can at least have these
right.
conversations around like, hey, what actually would make this better for everyone else?
For sure. Yeah, I think as you start to close off this conversation, do you have any other kind of tips and tricks or considerations that folks would have as they kind of go into the workforce, either as kind of a recent grad trying to figuring things out there, and then for those that are in the workforce and trying to plan out for like what is it going to be like in 5, 10, 20 years? Any sort of parting words on that side?
Yeah, I think it's keeping an open mind. We actually don't know where, like I mentioned, don't know where we're going to be yet, what's going to change. And if you think about some of the careers that people have now, they didn't exist 10, 20 years ago. And it could be
Fair enough.
possible
Yeah.
as things happen, as we advance in this kind of very interesting point in time moving forward for the next couple of years. So, social media influencer definitely wasn't a thing 20 years ago, whereas it's a very
Yeah.
popular thing now. You were mentioning kind of gig economy and side hustles. A lot of people have kind of used a lot of platforms that exist today to either supplement their income from doing things for fun, and sometimes they're so successful they leave careers to do something else. And so that
Hmm.
whole gig economy is driven by a lot of this stuff right now, and it could continue to evolve as we know. And I think traditional careers that we have maybe learned about in school can evolve or be impacted by that as well. And you mentioned as well, like around the trades, there's a lot of interest around the trades as well. I think the watch here is really around how technology and this whole shift around with all these barriers removed on the future of work, how technology can enable these, especially in these fields, to shift as well. Because, you think about, for example, you take automation. How can automation help with someone who's working as an electrician or someone who's helping working in plumbing? Because you may be able to kind of simplify or make things a lot more efficient, but there's going to be a need for expert plumbers to understand the technology as well. And that might be a whole new field in itself, because then you might end up advising plumbing companies.
Right. For sure. So I guess what I take from that is stay tuned. Make sure that you have the flexibility and the adaptability to
Right.
kind of see where the puck is going, so to speak, and kind of make yourself able to kind of adapt to new technologies, new environments, new work cultures, and structures and people along the way, and just be mindful and respectful of the people who might wish for how it was back in the day, that sort of thing,
Yeah,
because change can be quite difficult for folks, but
absolutely.
kind of making sure that people have the tools and everything they need to be on the journey, so that they can get to whatever the future work has in store for us. So thanks so much, Brian, for engaging in the conversation, and hopefully folks took some tidbits and useful tips in regards to like different ways that their future and their work could be different from where they were in school, all the way up until like post-COVID, what that might look like as well. So thanks so much
That's right.
for the conversation, and hopefully we'll have you back for a future episode.
That's great. Thanks for having me, Luki. I'm excited for the journey that we're all going to be on.
Take care.
Thanks for joining us on the Swike Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. If you like the podcast, please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you found this podcast. And if you can give us a review, that would be very appreciated. Feel free to contact me on LinkedIn at Luki Danu, LUKIDANU, and the same on most social media platforms. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks. Bye.